Good evening. Can I have your attention, please? If you would all find your seat, we will start our program. So we have the maximum amount of time available for both the presentations and the discussion afterwards. My name is Wiewel. I'm the president here at Portland State University, and I want to welcome you to this very important meeting in our series of Portland State Convenes, in which we try to bring important issues to the fore and give an opportunity for people to discuss. One of those meetings we had last fall was one of the mayoral debates, which was, as you may imagine, a lot of fun and very exciting. As an urban research university, we think it's very important to bring together people who care deeply about important issues facing our state or our region and give them a chance to talk about it, often coming from different perspectives, and then to have a chance to hear from a broader public about any thoughts, ideas, contrary opinions, and so on. And I'm sure that tonight will be a wonderful example of that. Tonight we're teaming up with the Oregonian to talk about the future of public safety and criminal justice in Oregon. And in addition to welcoming everybody in the audience and the panelists who will be introduced in a few minutes, I want to welcome at least two elected officials that I spotted, Bobby Regan from Portland Public Schools over there, and Jennifer Williamson, who is our, raise your hand, Jennifer, who is our state rep, who represents the area that Portland State is in. So thank you very much for being here. Now, to give you just a little bit of background on this issue, I think it was last year that Governor Kitzhaber appointed 12 Oregonians to study the challenge of the rising cost of the state prison system and to make recommendations on how to contain those costs, obviously without compromising public safety. And that's the challenge that we'll be talking about tonight. Legislators are just now starting to debate some of these recommendations in Salem. And we have 5 members of the group, which was called the Governor's Commission on Public Safety, here with us to discuss the recommendations and how the measures would impact the state. Now, on the program, you will see, in addition to the names of the panelists, you will also see little summary descriptions of the recommendations from the Commission. Some of those would reduce prison sentences for certain crimes, shift money to other programs to reduce the increasing prison cost, and to change criminal justice strategies. You will have a chance to weigh in with your views and react to what you hear from our panelists. Those remote electronic devices, I didn't like the fact that they had sort of orange ribbons. They should have been green, but all right. Those will enable you to cast your vote on several questions that we will pose on the 2 screens here in front, and we will have your responses counted instantaneously on the screens, and we'll show you a little bit later on how to use the clickers. I do want to remind you that when you leave, you do have to leave them on your seat or give them in a box, put them in a box. If you take them, that's a Measure 57 crime, all right? And if you don't know what that is, you'll find out soon. Not good. Besides which, it has a little tracking device in it, so we'll know how to find you. And then we will have also time for questions to the panel, and we ask that you wait with your questions until after we've had the panel speak. Now, crime and punishment are, of course, very complex topics. In fact, people have written very thick books on that. So we will first hear a summary of the issues and the current state of corrections in Oregon. This whole area is an area of great research and education here at Portland State in our College of Urban and Public Affairs. So I now want to introduce to you Jody Sund, who is an associate professor of criminology and criminal justice in our Hatfield School of Government, who will give us an overview. Her research focuses on the effectiveness of correctional policy, religion in prison, and public attitudes towards crimes. He's the past chair of the American Society of Criminology's Division on Corrections and Sentencing, and a former member of the Executive Board of the Academy of Criminal Justice Sciences. So please welcome Professor Jody Sund.
Thank you all for coming. So one of my favorite teachers reminded us when we were students that our future is chosen. And we invite you here to help us talk about the future of corrections in the state of Oregon and talk about the future of public safety. I'm sure that most of you have experienced the effects of the Great Recession. I know that it's affected certainly our discussions here at Portland State about what we're doing here. Have you had similar experiences in your organizations? Yes. So the Great Recession has spurred a reevaluation of what we're doing across a number of public sectors. It's also, though, afforded us an opportunity to ask some big questions. So we might think about this as difficult cuts, but in another way, it's an opportunity for us to think more critically about what we're doing and whether we're achieving our goals, and importantly, whether we can do things better. And this is what the governor asked the Public Safety Commission to do in 2012. He asked that they improve the effectiveness and efficiency of the public safety system and argued that we must reverse the presumption of unlimited corrections growth and redesign a sustainable system that provides opportunities to reduce victimization and keep people safe in the long term as it holds offenders accountable and protects public safety. I'm sure that was no problem, Chief, right? We'll get right on that. That is no small order. It's a very ambitious mandate. So we've asked you here today to join us to talk about some of these ideas and to also share your ideas about the future of corrections and public safety in Oregon. I want to give you some background, and it's difficult to keep a professor down to 15 minutes. I'm kind of programmed to talk in 50-minute segments, but I will try to control my desire to talk about these topics. So corrections in particular came under scrutiny for a few reasons. First of all, public safety is the third largest general fund expenditure in Oregon, and corrections is one of the fastest growing parts of that public safety budget and also of state spending. So for example, since 2001, the percentage of the state budget dedicated to corrections in particular has grown by 23%. So that number helps us understand in part why we've given extra scrutiny to correctional spending as we think about how we're using dollars in the state of Oregon. Something else that we should think about, though, isn't just the cost of corrections, but also some of our values that govern the use of punishment and corrections in the state. And one of the best illustrations of this comes from a set of ballot measures that Oregonians have voted on since the 1990s. So in particular, we have passed ballot measures. In 1994, we passed Measure 11. This established mandatory minimum sentences for 16 crimes, required that juveniles aged 15 and older charged with these offenses would be tried as adults. And this was supported by almost 66% of voters. In 2008, we also passed Measure 57, and we defeated Measure 61. 57 proposed or increased sentences for drug trafficking, theft against the elderly, repeat property crimes, and identity theft. It also required addiction treatment for certain offenders. This was supported by 61.3% of the voters. Measure 61, though, was defeated. It would have mandated longer sentences for certain drug and property crimes and identity theft, and it would have shifted costs to the state government away from local government. In 2010, we also passed by almost 57% of the vote, increased mandatory minimum sentences for some sex crimes and for repeat DUIs, and shifted costs from local governments to the state. So together, these ballot initiatives, the voice of Oregon voters, indicates that we do support longer, more certain prison sentences for offenders, particularly violent offenders. The defeat of Measure 61 and the passage of 57, though, also indicates that Oregonians value treatment, and they're less certain about the role of mandatory and longer sentences for property and drug offenders. So this indicates to us some of the values which we bring to this question of whether we're reaching our goals, whether we're realizing a system that reflects our values. This trend shows the prison population in Oregon from 1977 to 2001. These are whole numbers, and as you can see, we started in the mid-1970s, we had a much lower level of incarceration in Oregon than what we do now. And through the 1980s, we began to expand the use of incarceration. But it wasn't until the mid-1990s where we really started to see the prison population in Oregon grow. And this is similar to what happened nationally. So we're not unique in this trend. This is very similar to what happened nationally. So we've made a significant investment in incarceration as one of our preferred choices for dealing with crime. We have a little over 14,000 inmates incarcerated in 14 prisons located across the state. We also have another 13,500 individuals on post-prison supervision. The majority of inmates in Oregon are male, so upward of 90% are male, although there are a growing number of women who are incarcerated, and there's a growing percentage of women being incarcerated. Minorities are overrepresented in our prison system. In particular, African Americans, who make up just 2% of the Oregon population, make up over 9% of the prison population. And finally, just over 2/3 of people incarcerated in Oregon prisons are serving terms for person crimes. So this is not a property crime or a drug crime, but a crime against another person. Now, in addition to increasing the number of people incarcerated, we've also increased the size of the correctional budget. Approximately $1.4 billion in total funds was spent on the Department of Corrections budget in the 2011-2013 biennium. Since 2001, the corrections budget has grown by close to 40%. Now, corrections is a people industry. It's about individual people, and it's primarily, the primary expense of corrections is in operations. So the largest proportion of the corrections budget goes towards operations. The other parts of the budget go towards debt service, so paying for prison construction, and also grants to local community corrections programs. Now, the growth in the budget and the amount of money that we're spending in corrections is due to two primary reasons. First, we're incarcerating more individuals. So the number of individuals that we incarcerate has a direct effect on the cost of corrections. We've also seen an increase in the cost of operations. These data indicate one of the reasons we're seeing an increase in the number of people incarcerated. This is an illustration of the sentence length that people are serving. And it also shows us that Measure 11 in particular did what we intended it to do, which was increase the average sentence length that people were serving for a number of offenses. But it also reflects other changes that the legislature made during that time period. The sentence length has sort of leveled off, but we also see an increased number of people entering. So they're staying longer, and they're entering at a higher rate than in the past. Operating costs are primarily driven by cost of personnel. Another cost, though, is healthcare. And these data illustrate the change in the amount of money being spent on healthcare. Since the 2001 and 2003 biennium, the DOC Health Services budget, and that includes things like medical care for inmates, dental care, mental health care, and also pharmacy care, has grown by 180%. This is affected by similar things that affect growing healthcare costs for all of us, but it also reflects the increasing proportion of the inmate population who is older. So as the inmate population gets older, their healthcare costs increase, and this growth is in part due to that trend. Now, one of the things that has not caused an increase in the size of the prison population is crime. So crime has actually been going down, and it's been going down rather dramatically since the mid-1990s. So this might lead you to ask, well, is the prison population increase responsible for the decline in crime? And that's a really complicated question. That's the one that Dr. Wiewel mentioned that we write large tomes about. So that's a complicated question, but undoubtedly our use of incarceration has had some effect on declining crime rates. But what I want to think about is the effect of crime on incarceration. So crime is not the reason that we've seen a growth in prison population or the cost of incarceration. Crime has been declining steadily since the 1990s, and violent crime, illustrated in this figure, is at lows that we've not seen since the 70s. Here what we see is the dark blue line represents Oregon. And the lighter line, the sort of a yellowish-green color, represents the national crime rate. So when we take the long view, we can see that crime is down. Property crime is also down, but as you can see here, Oregon, which is represented by the blue line, has historically had a higher than the national average property crime problem. This began to change more recently, and we've seen Oregon's property crime rate sort of level off to approximately the same level as the country as a whole. Although in the last 2 years, we have seen a slight uptick in the amount of property crime being committed. And Oregon remains slightly above the national average in the amount of property crime. So these data illustrate the joint relationship between incarceration and crime. In other words, how much incarceration are we using for the amount of crime we have? So whether we have a particularly high or low level of incarceration, whether we use incarceration excessively or wisely, depends in part on how much crime we have. And what we can see from these data is that it looks a little bit different than the prison population trend. If you recall earlier, I argued that the prison population began to climb fairly noticeably in the 1980s. But crime was also increasing during that time, so it kind of makes sense that we would see more people going to prison because the crime rate was going up dramatically at that time. Since the 1990s, though, we've seen a decline in crime, but that has been accompanied by an increased incarceration. So what we can see here is that we are incarcerating a significantly larger proportion of those who commit crime, particularly violent crime. It also helps us see that we're using a larger amount of incarceration to address a smaller violent crime problem. Property crime follows a similar trend, although we use we use prison in a much more judicious way or limited way when it comes to property offending. So this just shows us the relationship between the amount of property crime we have and the amount of incarceration we have. And we can also see that we've seen recent dips in that usage, and that's driven by declines in the size of the prison population and increases in the amount of property crime that we've seen. So this raises some interesting questions for us. Has the buildup in incarceration been constructive or has it been destructive? It's critically important for us to think about these issues, not only because prison is expensive. We also want a public safety system to achieve results. We want offenders to be held accountable, we want retribution, but we also want efficient and effective crime control. A colleague of mine from from Purdue University, Bert Useem, has made a similar observation. And he reminds us that more prisons is not merely a policy preference in the way that one might prefer more bike trails, better schools, or lower taxes. More prisons means the greater exercise of coercive power by some people over other people. And I think that that's an important thing to remember, that when it comes to public safety and it comes to incarceration, the issues that we're dealing with are quite serious. We're dealing with real issues of coercion, real issues of violence, real issues of life and death. So we had a tall order. We have a very tall order in the public safety system. The commission worked very hard and came up with a number of recommendations. They had 5 recommendations for us to consider. And they're summarized here. First, to ensure that prison beds are used for serious and violent offenders. Second, to provide incentives for good behavior and reduce the likelihood of recidivism. Third, enhance evidence-based, cost-effective community supervision practices. Fourth, establish performance objectives and measure outcomes. All the professors clap now. Promote cost-conscious use of correctional resources. So these are the recommendations that they have for us and for reforming criminal justice. But we've invited you here to take stock and to share with us your priorities and your views about public safety in Oregon. So before we turn it over to our panel, I would like to hear from you. And I want to know, all in all, are you dissatisfied or satisfied with Oregon's approach to dealing with crime and public safety today? You've got these little clickers, and you can record your answer by clicking 1, 2, 3, or 4, and you will see a little response come up. Ah. Ooh, I just messed up that. Can we rewind that? Can we repoll? I accidentally advanced twice. All right, let's try that again. Let's see that again. All right, so we're going to do over. All right, so we've got 12 seconds. We have a countdown here, so please vote. I may have biased the results there. They look pretty much the same the second time around. 55% of you say that you're very dissatisfied. 29% say you're dissatisfied. 12% say you're satisfied. And 4% say you're very satisfied with criminal justice. So it sounds to me that we have a lot to talk about.
Thank you very much, Professor Sant. Okay, we'll get back to the clickers after the panels speak, but we're now turning it over to our moderator, Peter Bhatia, who is the editor of the Oregonian, where he's been for 20 years, the last 3 as editor. He's also a former president of the American Society of Newspaper Editors and currently serves as the president of the accrediting body for college journalism programs. Certainly somebody who's been looking at a lot of issues from a lot of perspectives. So please welcome Peter Bhatia.
Good evening, everyone. It's great to have such a big turnout tonight. This is a very important topic, and I think you're going to enjoy the conversation that we have, and you're going to get to use those clickers again multiple times, which I admit we were playing with them this afternoon. It's very cool. But first, we want to get right into the conversation here, so I'm going to introduce the panel and then invite each of them to give 2 or 3 minute opening statements, and then we'll go forward from there. So I'm going to introduce them from this way, from my right, your left, if I have that right, which I think I do. And very grateful to all of you for being here this evening and for the lively conversation that's to ensue. So first is Paul J. DeMuniz, a PSU graduate who became the first Hispanic elected to the Oregon Supreme Court when that occurred in the year 2000. He became the Chief Justice, elected to that position in 2006, and served in that position until he retired earlier this year. He's now on the faculty of the Willamette University College of Law, where he told me earlier he's having the time of his life, where he gets to talk to students as compared to lawyers talking to him. Next is John S. Foote, who's been the district attorney in Clackamas County since January of 2001. He previously served in that position in the 90s. He's also worked as a deputy director and inspector general of the Oregon Department of Corrections, and he's the past president of the Oregon District Attorneys Association. Next is Representative Chris Garrett, a Democrat from Lake Oswego. He was elected to the Oregon House in 2008. He's practiced law with the Portland law firm of Perkins Coie since 2002, and he serves as co-chairman of the Joint Committee on Public Safety. Next to him is his legislative colleague, Representative Andy Olson, who's a Republican from Albany. He served in the Oregon House for 8 years and previously worked for the state police for 29 years, retiring as a lieutenant. He also teaches at Lynn Benton Community College and serves with Representative Garrett as co-chair of the Joint Committee on Public Safety. And finally, Collette Peters was appointed as director of the Oregon Department of Corrections in February of 2012. She previously served as the director of the Oregon Youth Authority and as the Department of Corrections Inspector General and Assistant Director of Public Services. So all our panelists have traveled some distance to be here, burning up I-5 or other directions to get here for this evening. And with that, Mr. Chief Justice, would you go first?
Thank you, Peter. I just want to say it's a great pleasure to be here, but more wonderful than that is to see all the people who are interested in this. This was a very Oregon process, our commission. We met 10 times during the period, and we were always accompanied by the public. The public participated in everything we did. So we met 10 times. We conducted an in-depth analysis. And for me, what I saw in this process is we were working with data. In other words, we were not trying to offer policy options based on anecdote or 30-second sound bites, but looking at the data so that the legislature can use that data and when they make their public policy choices. We had a very, very broad range of experience on the commission. You see 5 of the members here, but we also had my sheriff from Marion County. We had a community corrections expert, we had a criminal defense lawyer, and we had a public member, Dick Withnell from Salem, who was very active in the community and a well-respected business person. So we had a broad range of experience on the commission. One of the things you should all know is that if you want to see what we did, all of it was filmed and recorded. It's all archived on the Criminal Justice Commission website. So all of it is available for the public, and I think that's very important. Professor Sunt identified 5 subject areas that involve 19 policy options that were in our report. And I think the one thing, you can imagine that as a commission we weren't all unanimous about a lot of things. One thing there was consensus about is we have a fine correctional system. What we're trying to do now is to fine-tune that system, to fine-tune it in a way that bends the cost curve for corrections, keeps the public safer, because we now, in the last 30 years, have accumulated a great deal of research about what works, what keeps our community safer. And let me just give you a very quick, just a real quick thing that's very personal to me. In Marion County, we get 600 to 700 prisoners a year who return from prison to Marion County. We have a Marion County reentry initiative. These are done county by county, and there's only perhaps, there was a wonderful one in Portland here with Mercy Corps, another one in Lane County, and the one in Marion County. In Marion County, for example, when those prisoners come into our Marion County reentry initiative, we track all of this, okay? We have all the data. Our recidivism rate, meaning the people who fail on post-prison supervision, we track all this, is at its highest 11%. The statewide average is 28%. So what we know is these kind of evidence-based practices will make our communities safer. They will stop victimization. They will make our communities safer. But we have to find the money to reinvest in them. And part of this process is called justice reinvestment. So we have 5 things that will bend the cost curve to the tune of about $600 million. And they include, 1, ensure that our prison beds are focused on serious and violent offenders. One of the key policy options under that is to move out of Measure 11 3 crimes: assault in the 2nd degree, robbery in the 2nd degree, and sex abuse in the 1st degree. And what underlies that whole idea is that those crimes have a broad spectrum of behavior. And one size does not fit all. And so we need to restore to judges the judicial discretion that permits judges to look at the character of the offender and the character of the offense. And we will, and what we're proposing, there's still a broad range of sentence. When you have a serious offender with one of those crimes, they'll be able to sentence them to a very severe prison sentence. But the idea here is to restore judicial discretion with those 3 crimes. Second, we want to incentivize good behavior and reduce the likelihood of recidivism. And so you'll hear about implementing earned discharge, community corrections, expanding earned time for DOC inmates and youth held in custody of the Oregon Youth Authority, and expand traditional reentry for offenders leaving prison. We need a statewide policy and funding so that we have reentry services in every county in this state. That will make our communities safer, and we get a return on human capital. These people become taxpayers, they become fathers, they become all of the husbands, the things that we want in our communities. Third, we want to enhance evidence-based, cost-effective community supervision practices, and you'll hear from other experts here, but we want to use risk and needs assessment tools to make sure we're putting our services where they belong with the right offenders that they belong with. Finally, we want to establish performance objectives and measurement outcomes. We want to buy outcomes, not programs. We want to put our money so we get a return on our investment. We want to apply cost-benefit analysis to corrections. We should be demanding that as in the public. We demand it in education. We demand it in healthcare. We should demand it in corrections. That's part of what we're asking here with this commission. And finally, we want to promote sustainable use of corrections resources So we want to create a performance incentive funding program for counties. We know which counties use the most prison beds. Guess what? The one where I come from in Marion County, which is not the largest county in the state, uses more prison space. So we know that. So we want to try to incentivize using this risk and needs assessment processes we have, so we're not using the most expensive space. All right? We want to reduce DOC's cost per day for inmates over a 10-year period, and we want to make sure that our prison forecast is accurate as we go forward. So that's a brief overview. Thanks. I hope I didn't go too far over that.
A little bit, but right. Who's going to argue with the Chief Justice, right? District Attorney Foote? Yeah.
Good evening. It's nice to be here. I saw the numbers, and I suspect most of you are not happy with the criminal justice system based on that. But I want to tell you something. You haven't been told all the facts. The data has been very controlled about what you know. And it is something I have protested about from the beginning. I want to tell you this fact. I've been in the system 30 years. I've been a defense attorney. I've been the interim director of the Department of Corrections. And I've been a prosecutor for most of my career. This is the best public safety system I have ever worked in. It is the most successful part of state government in the last 25 years by any measurement. Those are facts, absolutely facts. You don't hear it. I want to give you some other facts. The incarcerate rate in Oregon is well below the national average. And in fact, since 2004 to 2010, the incarceration rate in Oregon has been growing slower than the national incarceration rate. You don't hear that. Length of sentence in Oregon, all crimes, average length of sentence is 34 and a half months. 34 and a half months. Nationally, 59 months. Violent crime. In Oregon, it is 48 months. Nationally, 96 months. Property crime, 17 months. Nationally, 55 months. Do you ever hear this stuff? We only lock up 25% of convicted felons in this state. That's a fact. 90% of the people that come through the DA's office in my county get probation. 90% if you count felons and misdemeanors. We are doing what people say they want us to do. We lead the country in the percentage of inmates who are in prison for violent crime. Number one. We are number one in the percentage of inmates in prison for nonviolent crime. Number one. We're doing exactly what people say we should do. Cost per day is the last thing I'll talk about. There's so much to talk about because you don't hear all the facts. Should we do more? Yes. We should. We always should. If you're in public service, you're always trying to do more. But you know what we stand out the most about? According to the Pew study in 2012, Oregon has the highest cost per day per inmate in the country. Do we hear anything about that? You know what reducing cost per day, $1 saves in a biennium? $10 million. Why don't we start with that and use that money to invest in programs for the 2,200 people who are failing on supervision every year and going to prison and reduce that? There's a lot to talk about. I look forward to your questions. You're going to hear that I'm the only one who says these things. But they're facts. They're all facts. And I hope you will think about this. I guarantee if any of you came to my office or any office I know of and you actually saw what happens to the crimes in our counties, you would be surprised. They would break every stereotype you have. You would be surprised unless you're... Now, I know there's some people who aren't going to agree, and if you're a defendant, it's a whole different deal. And we accept that. That's part of the business we're in. But if you're a reasonable person, you will be surprised what happens in our criminal justice system every day. We are doing good things. Violent crime is down 50% since Measure 11 passed. 50%. It's hundreds of thousands of victims. We're doing a lot of good things. Thank you.
Representative Garrett.
Thank you very much. Many of the things that John just mentioned about the things we're doing well are things that I agree with. And what I think the importance of the work that we've done on this commission is to say we can't rest on looking at the system as it is today and say we're doing these things well and therefore we need to make no changes. What we learned in the commission process is that although, as I say, many of the statistics that John mentioned are correct in terms of having low incarceration rate, or incarcerating a low percentage of felons, if you look at the trend lines, we're actually moving in a direction that moves away from that. And we are on a path to take us closer to where some other states have been. We are projected to need to spend another $600 million over the next 10 years to add 2,300 prison beds. And I would go back to one of the opening comments that Jody made. What the recession has forced us to do in state government and at every level of government is say, even for the things that we think we're doing well, we have to ask the question, are there ways we can achieve the same results or better results at a lower cost? And the conclusion I think we can take from the commission work is absolutely yes. The basic problem is that, again, not to dispute all the statistics that John mentioned, but I think it's also a fact that our public safety spending in this state is weighed heavily and to an increasing degree to the part of the system that costs far and away the most and only deals with crime after it's happened, and that's the prisons. And that's at the expense of every other part of the public safety system. And you have to actually think about what that means. What is the public safety system? We think about prisons because that's the most important function government can probably provide, is to keep us free from dangerous people. But what else is public safety? It's state and local law enforcement. It's police officers, probation officers. It's the court system. It's drug and alcohol treatment. It's specialty courts for substance abusers and the mentally ill and veterans and other vulnerable populations. It means adequate mental health services. It means shelters for victims of domestic violence. It means education and reentry services for people coming out of prison, which is 93% of the people who go to prison. Everything I just mentioned on that list is part of the public safety system, and every one of those things is being starved of resources because of our increasing spending on the prison system. So I don't think it's enough, with all due respect to John, to say we're doing these things well. We have to ask, what are we sacrificing in order to keep doing these things the way we have been doing them? What's the opportunity cost of the status quo? A few more facts and then I'll close. Last biennium, we cut the community corrections budget by 20%. Because of these cuts, 50% of counties in the state reported a reduction in drug and alcohol treatment. 46% of counties reduced their mental health treatment. Some, like Josephine County, had to close their entire mental health court. 32% reduced their jail capacity. Lane County has closed a wing of its jail, and several times in the last year, as we've read in the papers, has been forced to open its doors and let inmates walk out. Reentry services, again, 93% of people we send into prison come back into our community. But the transition center in Klamath County had to close its doors last year. And 46% of counties experienced a reduction in victim restitution collection because they had to reduce their staff. Every one of these things is part of our public safety system. And most of these things are far, far cheaper than a day in prison. And they actually work to prevent crime.
Representative Olson.
Thank you, Peter. And thank you for all showing up tonight. You know, I'm looking at my watch and I'm thinking, now that our first three attorneys have spoken, I think my time's up. I mean, if you're going 5 minutes each, just an observation. But
and a fair one.
But anyways, hey, thank you. I'm going to be really quick here. I just want to share with you a little bit of the journey that I've been on this past, 2.5 years, and to get to where I'm at today. And I feel really privileged to be part of the, part of the committee that's dealing with public safety, but also having been part of the Commission on Public Safety as well. 2.5 years ago, I had a chance to go back to New York City, and we visited the Vera Institute, which did a lot of research projects. And Craig Prince is the director of the Criminal Justice Commission. And Craig, if you'd stand up, you're way in the back there. Now, we went back for a couple days, but, you know, it gave us an opportunity to start kind of thinking where we want to go. You know, what are some of the issues that we want to talk about? And all along, in the back of my mind, I'm saying, I want best policy for the state. I have always been that way. I am still that way. Do I weigh in on everything that comes in at me? Yes, I do. So 2.5 years ago, or a year and a half ago, just before Christmas, I went back to Washington, D.C., and at that time, the Bureau of Justice had invited me back, and we started talking then at that time, the Justice Reinvestment Initiative, JRI. And that's where we're at now, and that's how the Pew Center got involved with us as well. But during that time period, I also had the opportunity to meet with a number of other legislators. Excuse me. Starting up the motor, okay. We really had the opportunity to visit with a number of other legislators and learn what other states have been doing under the Justice Reinvestment Initiative. Texas, Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Kentucky. And all of a sudden, I kind of realized that those people kind of talk a little funny. But it was fun to watch and to learn what they've done. But for example, Georgia. Georgia has done a major shift in what they've done for prison reform back there. But you got to understand, they had some real serious low-hanging fruit. They were putting misdemeanors in prison. We don't do that. We're in the neighborhood of right around 23 to 25% of felons go to prison here in this state. So those are kind of things that I take into consideration as we move forward. And then last June, we all had the opportunity to go back to Denver for a couple of days and continue on again with the Pew Institute folks as well as the JRI, and to learn again other examples of what other states have been doing. So this has all been really beneficial for me, and as I move forward, I take that into consideration.
Director Peters.
Thank you, Peter. Good evening, everyone. It really is a pleasure to be here this afternoon, and it's always reassuring for me to see a group of individuals this large who care about public safety. So happy to be here. I think the important piece that I really want to emphasize is that this project, while focusing on curbing the cost of corrections, it really has been a conversation focused on reinvestment. It really has been a conversation on figuring out how we can curb the cost of corrections so that we can utilize the most expensive corrections option, prison beds, on those serious and violent offenders who need them most, and then reinvesting those dollars in the local public safety system, in victims, in community corrections, in evidence-based law enforcement, to really do the things that my fellow panelists have said, keep our communities safe and actually prevent crime before they come to us at corrections. So for those of you that were on the very dissatisfied portion of that graph, and I fear the satisfied folks are the team members I brought from the Department of Corrections. Or maybe I fear they're not even part of that group, I don't know. But what I would like to say to all of you is DA Foote, 2 former Inspector Generals, we actually do agree often, or at least on occasion. I agree that we're not here to reform a broken system. We're not. I am very proud of the public safety system that we have here in Oregon. We really have done tremendous work over the years, and you should be proud. We have had a historic and sustained crime decline. We have low violent and property crime rates. We do exactly what was mentioned earlier. We use probation extensively in lieu of prison. We have an incarceration rate below the national average. We have a prison system focused largely on offenders convicted of violent and sex offenses. And we utilize evidence-based practices, and all of these things swirl together to have really positive outcomes. We have been touted as having one of the lowest recidivism rates in the country at 26.5%, and that number is even dropping as we speak. So this is commendable, and I want to be clear that the Commission's work was really to take that solid base that we have and build on it. We had lots of conversations about making sure that we didn't put proposals forward that chipped away at those outcomes. But what we also found is that we've begun slipping in these areas. Since 2000, the prison population has grown 4 times faster than the national average, as the professor pointed out earlier. She also pointed out that Oregon's prison population has grown by nearly 50% to over 14,000, almost 14,300 inmates. And we now spend approximately $1.4 billion every biennium on corrections. The state forecasts say that we are going to receive 2,300 additional inmates. We're going to have a need for 2,300 additional beds over a 10-year period, at the cost of $600 million to you as taxpayers. In the next 2 years, we're going to receive over 800 of those. So there is a sense of urgency in this conversation because of those beds. And I think the other important thing to note is that while we've been pouring our resources into corrections, really viewing it as a limitless resource, other public safety portions of our system are starving. We had 20,000 unmet requests for emergency shelter beds for victims of domestic and sexual violence in 1 calendar year, in 2011. There are fewer state troopers on the road today than there were in 1960, and that's not adjusted for our population growth. So I believe that Oregon can do better. And I think the important thing to note in conclusion is that while we're talking about capping the prison population to obtain $40 million of savings this biennium to reinvest in the local public safety system, that grows. Next biennium, it's $100 million. The following biennium, it's $135 million. And over 10 years, it's more than $600 million. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. That was a fantastic opening, and I think it illustrates quite deeply the complexity of this situation. You know, there's been a lot of talk about cost containment. There's been a lot of talk about Measure 11 reform. If I may, John, the district attorneys, which you heard very clearly, are very happy with the system under which they labor at the moment. So as a citizen, it's sort of hard to get your arms around exactly what should happen. The governor has gotten a lot of mileage out of the $30,000 a year to house an inmate versus $10,000 a year to educate a student, which is a very good numerical image. Oh, 3 to 1. Well, yeah, we got to fix that. But that's pretty simplistic. And in fact, the numbers are true because we checked it out. But I guess I'd like to hear more from you all about what should come out of Salem this term. I mean, it's a tough time to be a legislator in Oregon, if it was ever easy, given the PERS conversation, the budgetary situation, the state of the economy, the emphasis on K through 12. Do a commercial for Portland State. Higher ed is horribly underfunded in this state, et cetera, et cetera. What should we look for? Should it be a tweak to Measure 11? Should we do nothing? Should we reduce prison costs? Talk a little more about that, because I think that's what we're all looking for.
I encourage you all to go to the website for the commission, and there's an alternative report on there, which I wrote, if you want to see some ideas. But let me put them into 3 pots. Number 1, this prison forecast has been wrong. The 10-year forecast has been wrong every time for the last 17 years. Every time it has been high, and every time it has been on average 38% high. 38%. We are convinced that the forecast of 2,300 beds is fiction. I have to say that unequivocally. Go look at the data yourself. Go look at our alternative report. No one has challenged us on these numbers. Go look at the current forecast that was in October. We're 6 months into it. we have half as many inmates as they forecast. That's a short span, but it follows the pattern. So that's the first thing. This is a smaller problem than we're being told. Number two, prisons are less than 10% of the state budget. You're not going to fix education or mental health on the backs of prisons unless you close them all. Number three, what we should do, in my opinion, with some other things, you'll see we had some other ideas in the report, some ideas that support a lot of this, is attack cost per day. $3 or $4 a day, $30 or $40 million, and make that investment in programs that have been rigorously, not just because they feel good, but because they actually change behavior that would not change otherwise, and attack the people who are failing on supervision. And if you do that effectively, you will curtail prison growth. That's a fact. So there is a way to do this, but it's not the way you're being told. The problem is smaller, more manageable, and we can build on our successes. There's so much to say about the things you hear that just don't hold up under scrutiny. And the problem was that the data we got in the commission, I have to say this, was so tightly controlled that we really had no opportunity to debate it. I got my PowerPoint presentations when I sat down at the meeting. I didn't see them beforehand. I didn't have a chance to ask questions. I've done a lot of that since. And there are other things that indicate that this is not as big and we can do rational things. Let me ask you, if we're growing at a moderate rate, the prison growth last 4 years has been about population growth. And we got a low incarceration rate, shorter sentences than everybody else, all by all measurements, we only lock up a certain percentage of felons, and yet we had this cost that was the number one in the country. What would you go for first if it was your budget? I say go for cost first and use the money to reinvest. A lot of us in public safety have had our budgets hit. DAs have lost virtually all their state funding. I'm not here to ask you for more state money. That's a relationship between me and my county, primarily. And every state office has lost money. We have to make do with what we have. This isn't time for everyone to get whole on the backs of prisons. Let's do a balanced approach and invest the money in programs that work. That's really, we're not saying no, we're saying do it differently. Thank you.
Please.
Well, just to give a counterpoint on the prison forecasts, at least the data that I looked at said the accuracy of the 10-year prison projection growths have been within 6 percentage points, and over the last 22-year forecasts, which the legislators use to forecast for the biennium, those have been accurate within 1 percentage point. So I disagree with John about his characterization of that. Second of all, I agree with John. We should be investing in evidence-based practices that work. Here's a good one. If we take a snapshot of the 14,000 prisoners any particular day, 46% of those prisoners failed either on probation or on post-prison supervision. They failed. If we can reduce those failures, think of how much money we save. If we reduce the recidivism rate by just 1%, I think the number is like $6 million or something. But the problem here is, and I'll let the legislators speak to this, where do we get the money to invest in the programs that we're talking about? That's why this is called justice reinvestment. We have to bend the cost curve in a way that permits us to reinvest in victim services, to reinvest in these transitional programs, to reinvest in our state police, all of those things. But the only way we're going to find that money is to bend that cost curve. And because of what we know with the social science today, because we know what works, we can bend that cost curve and make the communities safer.
Go ahead, please.
I wish I could solve this problem. I wish we at the Department of Corrections could turn the dials enough to solve this problem and come up with $600 million over the next 10 years to reinvest locally. We can't. When you look at our cost per day, it is very complicated. We do not have the highest cost per day in the country. The study that DA Foote is referring to actually includes things like our debt service. So when you look at our cost per day based on the variables that we typically use to determine cost per day, we rest about in the middle. Now, I know Oregonians don't typically like to just rest in the middle. So as the director of the Department of Corrections, I truly believe it's my responsibility to run an efficient, effective operation. And that's exactly what we're going to do. And we're going to do everything we can to mitigate the growth in corrections internally. And in fact, we're engaging in an organizational review right now as we speak to look at every process and every sub-process that we have in the organization to see if we can save money and to see if we can improve outcomes. When you look at the cost per day, it's going up. When you look at the $85 a day I spend and you sweep out of there salaries, retirements, and benefits, I'm left with $24 a day for food, clothing, shelter, medical, and mental health. Commodities are going up. Pharmaceuticals are going up. So these costs are going up. The conversation really needs to be about how do we mitigate those costs in concert with reforms that help us dial down the trajectory of spending over the next 10 years.
Representatives Garrett, Olson, what would you like to see come out of this session in this context, or what are your expectations?
Well, Peter, there's because of my nature, I like to explore and do some homework and digging to really find out good principles. One of the things I clearly would like to see is to develop some type of a reentry program for folks coming out, because I want to try to deal with the recidivism rate. I'd like to see people come out being successful with times. And as a result of that, I'm just going to tell you a really quick story. Collette and Craig Prinz and I, several months back, and my youngest girl, Abby, went up to visit Dave's Killer Bread, David Dahl. How many of you eat Dave's Killer Bread? Well, God bless you. Okay, it's
He's in Clackamas.
but it was kind of fun to go up there and visit with Dave, because if you haven't ever seen his bakery out in Milwaukee, it's kind of fun to see. I was curious what's going on there, because he's got 270 employees. 1/3 of those are felons. How's he doing that, and how's he being successful for the reentry part of it? But I'll just quickly, as this example, how I try to do the homework and thinking of where I really would like to go as we gain dollars. Dave took us through the bakery on a tour, and we're walking through, and all of a sudden, here's this one guy, big giant guy, white guy, his name's Bob. And he yells at Bob, and he says, "Bob, come on over here." And Bob comes over. He's a big guy, and he's got the upper body like he's been in the joint for a while. Excuse me, in the Department of Corrections.
Thank you, Representative.
I'm sorry. Okay, but and then he comes over and he's got ink all over his body too, and he's just got a soft, calm spirit about him. And Dave says to him, he says, "Bob's a success story." And we got to meet him and talk to him a little bit, and I mean the guy was really humble. And then we walk a little bit further down, and we stumble onto an African-American by the name of Ricky. And Dave's the same thing. He yells at him and says, "Ricky, get over here." And he introduces us to him. And Ricky's the same thing. He's a great big giant guy, upper body. He's been in the joint for a while too. He's got ink all over his body too. Same thing, spirit. Was just calm, quiet, humble. So that was one of the things that we talked about Dave afterwards when we met. And we asked him, well, how do you do it? How can you be so successful? And one of the things he looked for always was that the only people I'll hire is if they come here with a humbled heart. And I thought, wow. Now I say that because there's really only two reasons why we think of people going to prison. They're either going to prison because we're afraid of them or we're mad at them. If you think about it, that's what you really break down. The ones that are afraid, that's obvious. I mean, they really do need to be there. They've done some nasty stuff. I don't want them out on the streets. Protect you. But the ones that we're mad at, we got to start kind of thinking a little bit, are those the ones that we can maybe develop some dollars for to do a reentry, to get them on board? And I don't think there's anybody in here that would disagree with that. But those are, that's kind of where I'm thinking what I'd like to see happen.
You get the last word on this question?
Well, you mentioned it's hard to be a legislator these days. I'm in my third term, and ever since I got here, we've been cutting budgets and dealing with declining revenues and a recession and really painful decisions. But we've also, I think Oregon Legislature has done some remarkable things in the last few years. We've done sweeping changes in our education system. We have made transformational changes in our healthcare system that put us now at the head of the pack in the country in terms of trying to break out of this healthcare mold that traps us in these huge cost increases. The third big thing we do in the state is public safety, and I want to see us come out of this session having completed the trifecta of taking a system that I agree is sound and good in many ways, but really correcting our course to make sure that we maintain a strong system and take advantage of the great opportunities that we can realize if we make some targeted reinvestments with some really modest changes to our corrections practices.
All right, we're going to go to the interactive part of the program now, so grab your clickers. We're going to do a couple of warm-up questions just to make sure I can run this part of the technology. I have great confidence in you. Thank you all for those very thoughtful answers. So we've got about 10 questions. We'll try to get through them, and I'll invite the panel to react to some of the answers as we tabulate. But again, you'll see a little countdown clock in the corner. That means you have 15 seconds to respond. And we were joking earlier today, somebody could sing the Final Jeopardy music. Feel free if you wish. But so here's the first question. I don't know that everybody can read it, so I'll read them out loud to you. How safe do you feel in your community? 1, very safe. 2, somewhat safe. 3, somewhat unsafe. And 4, very unsafe. So there goes the countdown clock. You have 15 seconds. Where you live. Neighborhood. You can define it any way you want. Yep. Greater Portland, the state of Oregon, downtown Portland, in my case, Garden Home, whatever you like. Now the results. Let's see, I can't see how many results or people we have, but, oh, that's interesting. 45% say very safe, 45% say somewhat safe, so 90% feel pretty safe in their community. That's a good number. So let's do another practice question, then we'll get into some of the meatier ones. How much do you worry about you or your family being a victim of crime? 1, frequently. 2, occasionally. 3, rarely. 4, never. The clock is running. No, go right ahead. Yeah. Okay. The envelope, please. Interesting. So 8% say frequently, 43% occasionally, 40% rarely, and 9% never. So really most of us live in the middle on that one, too. Okay, the next question, now we're going to get into a little meatier conversation and a little more complexity. Maybe. Here we go. Question number 3. There are many approaches to dealing with crime. Which one of the following 4 options do you think should be Oregon's top priority in dealing with crime? 1, enforcement, such as putting more police on the streets. 2, punishment, such as longer sentences and more prisons. 3, prevention, such as youth education and community programs. And 4, rehabilitation, such as job training and education for offenders. So this is particularly a germane question to what we've just been talking about up here on the panel. So here goes the clock. Ready? Nope, got to vote. The clock is running. Okay, let's see what it says. So 2% for enforcement, 2% for punishment, 58% for prevention, and 38% for rehabilitation. So almost everyone here is looking to fix the front end and the aftercare, if you will. Does that surprise anybody? No. No. Good. All right, we'll keep moving because we want to leave plenty of time at the end for your questions to interact with the panel. Number 4. Oregon currently requires a prison sentence of a specific length of time for all those convicted of certain crimes. In general, do you think these mandatory sentences are a good idea, or do you think that judges should have more say in deciding sentences? The clock is running. Okay. 95%. What do you think about that, Paul? Does that surprise you?
Well, coming from the judicial branch of government,
yeah, I realize this is a setup.
I like to tell young law students, when they give you a softball, don't miss it.
Yeah. Well said. Next question.
Peter?
Yes.
Can I say one thing? Do you know that in the Measure 11 cases, 59% of the time, judges give a consecutive sentence, which is discretionary.
Say that again, John, just so everybody gets it.
And this is not my study, this is Criminal Justice Commission study. 59% of the time in a Measure 11 case, a judge gives a consecutive sentence, which is discretionary. So there is judicial discretion in 59% of those cases. Again,
okay.
Don't have to believe me, go read the study.
Next question. Make sure I'm in the right place. Yes, crime and public safety are complex problems that cannot be addressed without costs. Do you think Oregon spends too little, too much, or about the right amount of money on crime prevention and community supervision programs? Clock's running. Okay. So too little gets 81% of the vote. Again, consistent with what we've seen on other questions. Okay, let's keep going. Next, one of the goals of criminal justice is to prevent criminals from reoffending. We've heard a lot of conversation about recidivism tonight. Rank the following strategies for reducing prison recidivism from most important to least important, with one being the most important. Does everybody understand the question? Oh. That didn't make sense. That's good. I'm glad we changed it. Which one of the options do you think is most effective to reduce recidivism? I'm sitting here reading it and saying, that makes no sense at all. Did I write that? No. Anyway, mandatory sentences, treatment programs, community-based treatment programs, strict supervision in the community, or prison work and education programs. So go ahead and vote.
Paul, we did get a clicker.
You want
Just
one?
put one more vote in my hand.
We can arrange that.
It would up your numbers a lot.
Yeah, percentage-wise. it would
Oh, that's
increase my
interesting.
size.
So community-based programs gets two-thirds
Oh, no.
of the vote.
Please.
This is a democracy, after all.
It is a democracy.
All right, we'll do a couple more, and then we'll open up the conversation. So here's a specific Measure 11 question responding to the commission recommendations. Do you support or oppose changing Measure 11 to judges more say in sentencing certain robbery, assault, and sex abuse offenses? You heard about this earlier. So 1 is support, 2 is oppose. Okay. 94% support. John, would it be safe to say that in the district attorney community across the state, any change in Measure 11 would be opposed, or is there some, among you who have to prosecute these cases, is there some interest in any change in 11?
You probably don't know, but DAs have actually proposed a number of changes to Measure 11, which are now law, introducing judicial discretion to most of the second-degree crimes. We did that back in the 90s. We actually, I couldn't get all the DAs to agree to this, but I had another proposal for a certain category of targeted sex crimes. But I want to tell you a couple things about this. The sex abuse cases, you know what those victims are? Do you know? They're kids. Do you know who the victims are in assault cases most of the time on felony assaults? They're domestic violence. That's the cases we're talking about. You know, this goes back to what is really happening and who are these victims. And I will just introduce this idea to you, which I've also said to my fellow commissioners. The first purpose of sentencing in our business, and I think in the public's business and in victims' business, is not whether we can change a defendant. It's justice. There's no conversation about that tonight. What is the appropriate conviction and what is the appropriate sentence? Now, you all may have a different idea about what that is. That's what juries do, and that's what we try and listen to. But our first responsibility in a serious crime is justice, not whether we can change somebody. And that's really the core of why we want to protect the sentences we have now, because we think they're pretty low and they're pretty fair. So I'll throw that out for your thought.
I think one thing that we ought to comment on, however, is that this is a modest proposal. The Commission did not put into the policy options changing anything about assault in the first degree, rape in the first degree, robbery in the first degree, all those very serious, egregious crimes. And I'm not saying these are not serious crimes, but those on the upper category remain untouched. This is a modest adjustment to 3 of these crimes, which were adjusted already back in 1997 by the legislature and in 2001 by the legislature.
Good. I think we'll do one more question, if that's all right, and then open it up, because we want to be mindful of everyone's time. So the last question we'll tackle is a similar question about Measure 57. Again, allowing judges more leeway in sentencing for repeat property and drug offenders. You recall from the earlier presentation, Measure 57 was one of the antecedents, if you will, of Measure 11, even though it was many years later. Support or oppose? The clock's running. Okay. And again, 94% support giving judges more leeway.
Here, can
Please.
I hate to keep saying, but
That's okay.
Do you know that there is judicial discretion in Measure 57 now? That in fact, Measure 61 was on the ballot. It had mandatory minimum sentence for property crimes, and it was the district attorneys who designed Measure 57 with judicial discretion as an alternative, went out and campaigned for it, and it beat 61. Now, the discretion in 57 is narrow, but there is judicial discretion to drop out of a prison sentence up to a point. And we're talking about people with long criminal history, stealing cars, stealing identity, breaking into homes, businesses. It's a targeted group of people. This kind of implies they're mandatory minimum sentences in 57. It's not true. I was involved in creating it, and it's just not true. We created 57 as an alternative to mandatory minimum sentences.
So let's go to you and get your questions. There is a microphone in the audience, and if you put your hand up, there are 2 microphones actually in the audience. If you put your hand up, one of the folks with microphones will come to you. You may ask somebody on the panel a specific question. You may ask the whole panel a question. If you start giving a speech, I'll cut you off. So, because we want to get in as many questions as we can. Let's start right over here. Please stand up and ask your question if that's convenient.
My question is about the death penalty, and has that been considered in all of these meetings?
I'll just answer for the commission. It was not part of the subject matter or the charge from the governor, so we did not address that.
Is there any legislation? I don't think there is. Is there some before you right now?
We had a hearing in the House Judiciary Committee last week, and it is currently sitting in committee.
I think, to be honest, I think the idea is for the people who want sentence changes that they save death penalty for another session and deal with this. Mm-hmm. That's not my plan, but I think that is the plan.
Over here.
Hi, I'm with the Oregon Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence, and I've heard a lot of great things being said up there tonight, especially about community-based programming and what we see and how we see that works. And what I want to know is if you are committed to passing these alternatives and putting more funding towards the prevention services and the community-based programming that really impact victims of violent crime.
Our legislators?
I'll take a first crack at it. There is a bill, the proposal that's being, I guess, given most serious consideration would double the current state general fund allocation from $4 million to $8 million for the DV program. It's another example, though, of where's the money going to come from. And those additional resources we need to fund these programs have to come from savings within the public safety system. There simply isn't money anywhere else. So it's going to be contingent on us getting some policy reforms enacted.
Anything you want to add? Okay.
I don't recall offhand.
Go ahead on our right.
Hi, my name's Tina, and I'm a social work student here at PSU. And I like what you guys have been saying so far about like the proposed changes that were described in the packet and stuff. But there was a few days ago, the Oregonian printed an article stating that Oregon is 46th in the country for money spent per pupil on higher education. And so it seems like our future is a little bit bleak unless we get like a handle on it. To me, it seems kind of ironic that we're at this forum here at PSU, but I'm having a hard time like affording college tuition, and more and more money just keeps getting spent on prisons. Even the woman's PowerPoint presentations said that there's being more spent in prisons than there is on higher education. Not K through 12, but there is on higher education. So I was wondering if any of you could speak to that. Does that seem backwards to any of you all?
So let me, Peter, if I understand your question, you're concerned about what the impact is and what we're trying to do from the legislator's perspective on putting more dollars into education, K through 12 as well as higher ed?
No, just higher education.
Just higher education? Well, one good thing is that 2 years ago, we're at a good level. Actually, higher ed took a little bit of a downturn. This year, it's a lot better, than what it has been before. So, even better than what the governor's recommended budget was. It's higher from what the co-chairs have come out with last week. So, it's on the right track.
Right here.
Back here, please.
Hi, my name is Cassandra, and I grew up in Salem, Marion County. I went to Highland Elementary and Chemeketa, and graduated from North as well. I also worked on national juvenile criminal justice policy through the MacArthur Foundation. But my question tonight is It seems like it's about time we reform our mandatory minimums here in Oregon. And it also seems like the most vocal opposition is coming from district attorneys. And I want to know, why is no one talking about their obvious self-interest in maintaining policies like these that are flawed? When mandatory minimums transferred...
Would you ask a question, please?
Yes. Mandatory minimums transferring power to judges, or transferring power to district attorneys, not judges. Why are we not talking about the transparency in their obvious self-interest?
I'll be glad to answer that. Tell me what my interest is. What do I get out of getting good sentences? Power? Really? You think that's what it's about?
Taking power away from judges and having discretion.
Well, that's your opinion. I would suggest to you that you need to go learn about how the system works. This isn't... Okay.
Let him speak.
I recognize I'm in an audience that doesn't agree with me. We saw that in the beginning, and I understand that. Most audiences I go to have a very different point of view. So I will tell you that I just don't think that holds up. And I would be glad to have that conversation. We had it on the commission. You know, there is more judicial discretion. Just to give you an example, there's more judicial discretion taken away in this commission report than Measure 11 ever would, and it's in the form of structured sanctions. I've talked to judges about this. You may or may not know what structured sanctions is, but on a day-to-day basis, the decision-making for what happens to somebody who's on probation to a judge is made by a probation officer and not a judge. And I happen to believe in that concept. I believe in structured sanctions, but it's a very one-sided conversation about judicial discretion. Leave it at that.
Go ahead.
I think, Peter, I just want to share with everybody here, you got to remember, you got to go back in time a little bit. Why did Measure 11 occur? Okay. Do I think it's time to have the discussion maybe to reevaluate that? I do. I mean, that's why I've been on the committee and the commission as well. But you got to go back in time. You got to understand why that occurred. Because across the state, there was inconsistency in what sentencing was occurring. And that created some real angst for victims. It caused real angst for a lot of the population. And that's why you ended up getting 66% of the voters voting for Measure 11. But that's been 18 years ago now. And, you know, this is good to have the discussion. I agree. But you don't ever forget where we came from and why we got there. I think that's important.
Where are microphone? Over here, sir.
Hi, my name is Diallo Bennett. I'm a student here at Portland State, and my question is actually about have you guys looked into other countries? And basically, a background on this question is basically it's not rocket science to fix this system. And I only heard a couple points about fixing root causes of why people go into prison in the first place. And the theory of punishment doesn't actually stop crime. It actually ends up preventing it and evolving it. And so if you guys look at other countries like Norway, they actually have a system that rehabilitates prisoners fully. And it's actually a really good system. Have you guys looked into other countries and seen what they do to stop crime? Because here in America, we have the largest prison population in the whole world. 25% of the world's population is here in America. So.
Go ahead, please.
I would say that we are on the commission and in our work in public safety, we are constantly looking for best practices, be it across the country or across the nation. You're right, we incarcerate more people in the United States than we do in any other industrialized country. We are also the only country that spends more on corrections than we do on local law enforcement. When you talk about programs like the ones in Norway, I think here in Oregon, when you look comparatively across the country, we work really hard at working on that reformation piece. I agree with DA Foote. The first piece is that justice, that punishment, that accountability. But then the second half of our mission at the Department of Corrections is to ensure that that individual does not commit another crime and create another victim upon release. So is there room for improvement? Always. But we continuously look for those evidence-based practices to do that. Thank you.
Anybody else want to? No? Okay. Where's our Mo? Right in front of me.
This question's for DA Foote, over here behind the podium. So I want to understand correctly. You believe that judges have a lot of discretion now. Do I understand correctly that you're basically categorically opposed to giving them more discretion because there's maybe a fear of going back to what it was before, the inconsistency? What is the fear? Not the horror story anecdote, but what is your fear?
Well, first of all, I'm married to a judge, so I really like judges. And I'm a trial lawyer by trade, so I respect judges. And I think they're the most important function in the system. They're the backbone. They're where all the decisions are made. But judicial discretion has changed a lot in the last 22 years beyond Measure 11. If you go back and look at the sentencing guidelines, it narrows judicial discretion substantially. And there was a reason why we did that. And I didn't do it. Fact is, I didn't campaign or help write Measure 11 either. I mean, no other DA in the state did, just so you know. And we opposed Measure 61, which said mandatory. No DA in the state's ever supported mandatory minimums. But the truth is, our system has focused judicial discretion way beyond Measure 11. And older judges that I knew, that I'm old, but they were older than I, and so they were longer in the system, and they'd been around before sentencing guidelines and before Measure 11, and they really didn't like the fact that Measure 11 took away discretion. So the point I'm trying to make is that judicial discretion has been very narrowly directed for a long time. The purposes for that are the ones you're not talking about, which is consistent results, guided, consistent results. And the reason that was done in sentencing guidelines in 1989 was because of the wide range of kinds of sentences for the same crime. I had people convicted of armed robbery, sodomy in the first degree on a 11-year-old getting probation in the old days. So the system narrowed it then, and the only thing that Measure 11 takes away is the ability to go lower, not higher. And yeah, exactly. And the truth is, if you knew the facts of the cases, there's a reason why in 59% of the cases, the sentences are higher than the mandatory minimum because of the nature of the cases. And half of Measure 11 has judicial discretion circumscribed into Measure 11 now, and DAs did that. So, well, the legislature did it, but at the request of DAs. So it's not that it's not like we're talking about judicial discretion or no judicial. If you want to have complete judicial discretion, go back to the 80s. Because that's when you had it.
Well, I disagree with John about it's very difficult to get the exact history of this, but I served on the original sentencing guideline board that created the guidelines. And the guideline sentencing policy was both a population control program, okay? There was a projected growth in prison population, and the guideline ranges were set up in order to meet those expected increases in population. But the disparity in sentencing is much more complicated. The issues that people were complaining about were disparity in sentencing in different regions of the state, for one thing. And it wasn't just judges. District attorneys, criminal defense lawyers, all were able in that system, which was an indeterminate sentencing system, to create these disparate sentences. So if you stole a car in Multnomah County, you got probation. If you stole a car in one of the rural counties, you went to prison because they didn't have that many crimes. I mean, those are the, yeah, well, if you cattle rustled, you got the death penalty probably. But but those were, there was this kind of disparity was what was driving that. I don't know the intricacies of what happened in the legislature. I've always heard it was because the legislature didn't increase some of the guideline sentences that there was a promise that they would do, and that's what ended up with where we got with this. But it's a complicated question and hard to recreate the history.
Good question. We have time for about 4 more questions, so we'll go back here.
Hi, you guys many of you mentioned how successful the current correction system is. However, the opening presentation said that there's a 7% disparity for minorities within the system. What's being done to address that specific problem?
Good question. I can tell you that justice, real justice, doesn't tolerate that kind of thing, the underlying implication of having one group overly represented. Real justice, which is what I personally aspire to, and I think the people in my business. So I think the answer is complicated because you also have to look at what is victimization. Does it mirror? And there are a lot of things why. I mean, there could be that there's an intention to do something, or there could be that it's a reflection of something, because a lot of crime is a reflection of something. So when we go about getting solutions, I think we have to be very careful about how we approach that. That would be my only observation. Other than that, I think it's a complicated, because you don't want different justice for either way. You don't want it harsher for one group than another. You want it more lenient than for another. You want it based on the facts. So it's complicated.
Disproportionality has been in our system for some time, and I would like to compliment my own school. Portland State University has done a lot of work collecting the data on trying to understand which parts of the system contribute to that. And what you find out is it's the whole system. You can't just isolate one part of it. It's not policies by district attorneys or sheriffs or police. It's a whole system, and we have worked hard in this state, and I know the executive branch, the governor, holds a disproportionate conference. I don't know if it's every year, but for the juvenile system, trying to get to the bottom of this question, and it's something we should never give up on.
Can I have one? I just remember one thing. There's a study by the Criminal Justice Commission, and Craig is back there, and I'll be very general because I just have a vague memory of this, but I do believe it showed that sentences under Measure 11, and I'm looking at Craig, for African Americans were actually less. I got that right, Craig? I think that's right. It was surprising. Go read the study. Don't take my word for it. But all I'm saying is that it's not a simple answer. I think there were some minorities where it was more and some there were less. But I think African Americans were less, which is the largest. Well, actually, Hispanics, I think, were the largest, weren't they?
Largest percentage, yeah.
Yeah, they were. Okay.
Yeah. Let's go here.
I just want to speak as someone who's a former drug addict and someone who graduated college, soon to go to law school. I feel like I'm a success story. And I feel like the thing that helped me was drug treatment. And also someone who spent most of my college career researching Oregon's criminal justice system. I have a little bit of offense to people saying that I might not have all my information. But besides that, I feel like I didn't get a lot of specifics on what you guys might be planning in terms of drug treatment specifically. That's something I stand firmly behind. And also, everything that's been talked about justice reinvestment in particular.
I think one sort of response to that is one of the things that we want to reinvest in is we need statewide standards for our drug treatment courts, for our mental health courts, for our veterans courts, because the results are not uniform. While they're doing great things in terms of the return of human capital and what we're doing, we need to make sure that we're uniform across the state and that we standardize those practices to make sure we get those great outcomes everywhere. And that's one of the things that we have to do is find the money to reinvest in those programs.
Peter, hey, thank you. Hey, good job. I'll just tell you that. Good job. Proud of you for that. Listen, there's another thing District Attorney mentioned about where we went forward back in 2008 in developing Measure 57 as an alternative to Measure 61. But there was another parallel bill that we moved forward in the legislature that came out for you to understand what we were trying to do with 57, and that was House Bill 3836, or 3638, excuse me. And what that did, it had a treatment piece in it for $40 million. And a portion of that was going to go to drug court Criminal Justice Commission was going to be involved in that, but we recognized at that point how important that was. And that's still, we still got to try to get that vision, still keep driving that kind of concept.
I would just add that I think the Commission's work was very consistent with the Governor's thinking in that these reform efforts and the reductions should not include reductions to in-prison programming. So I think there's a commitment to continuing at least the current level of alcohol and drug treatment that we are able to provide in prison. And then, of course, the reinvestment conversation includes that preventative piece as well. Thank you.
Congratulations as well to you. We like to see people succeed.
Amen.
But I would tell you, if you want to see an interesting program, something that I think is really different, go look at the study about Hope Probation in Hawaii. It is really different. We got a pilot going on in Clackamas County. We got a federal grant. One of 4 test sites. I don't know how it's going to turn out. It's a 2-year study. But they did a 2-year randomized study of Hope Probation in Hawaii. You ought to ask Judge to come here and talk. He is a really interesting man, and he has a lot of interesting ideas that I think are right about human behavior and how to get people to help them change. And Hope Probation is different. Anyway, I could go on and on about it. I think it's a really exciting idea. I think it has profound implications for how we do things, but it's a big idea.
This will be our final question. We're out of time, I'm afraid, but please go ahead.
Well, I don't want to repeat a question that was just asked. I also I want to thank you all for what you've done. And I did notice that in the cost per day, that the last line of the reports of your wonderful recommendations was that you would hold harmless any recidivism reduction programs. And I'm glad to hear you say, Director Peters, because we at Volunteers of America, in conjunction with post-release and pre-release services, we know it's a reentry continuum, and my question has to do with the fact that with these high-risk offenders, the research does show you need to provide a minimum of 300 hours of treatment. And the research does show you bridge treatment between inside the institution and post-release. And so I'm very happy about the post-release treatment and the addition of supervision. And I would just ask, in terms of, 65% of our population are people of color. 65%, when that's such a small percentage of the overall population in prison. So do you have any strategies to utilize some of the funds in prison to also pay for this treatment?
Great, thank you. Well, first, I'd like to say thanks for all of your work with Volunteers of America. It's organizations like yours and individuals that really help us transition these offenders back into the community, and we can't do it without your efforts, so thank you very much. We do have a plan, and that really is to build on the base that the Department of Corrections has established over the years. So many of you who have been following the work in the Department of Corrections know that we do have the lowest recidivism rate in the country, and I think it is because we've been able to figure out how to target the limited resources we need for those who are high risk and have a high need. So we've, in the last year, actually shortly after joining the department, we actually engaged in a very large reorganization of the department. And we took everything that actually helps improve the success of these individuals in our custody upon release. Religious services, victim services, volunteer services, education, vocational education. And we took all those services and put them in one division and aligned that vision. We've asked that division director to really establish targets and begin to measure outcomes to improve that transition and that handoff to community corrections and to the organizations in the community that really help us wrap services around these individuals. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to thank all of the audience for your attention, for the questions. I want to really join me all, please, in thanking our panelists for an absolutely great job. Emotions can easily run high on this topic, and I think we've done a great job making sure that we shed more light than heat on it. And I think that's the nature of debate, certainly as it ought to take place in an academic institution. So I want to thank everybody again. Peter, for your role. Jody, for your wonderful introduction. And please, another reminder to just leave the clickers on the chair or put them in the box as you go out. Thank you so much.